The battle continued across millions of kilometers of empty space. The Zelthari armada had been reduced to 270 ships. They pushed forward with desperate determination. Commander Vexthal had lost his flagship when a human missile got through the shield and exploded its fusion warhead directly against the hull. He now gave orders from a different ship called the Final Verdict. He coordinated the fleet even as more ships kept dying. "The primitives fight well," his tactical officer said, his alien mouth parts clicking with grudging respect. "Better than our information predicted." "They are just animals with weapons," Vexthal growled angrily. "We have destroyed half their platforms. Their mobile fleet is small. Once we break through to their inner system, we will turn their worlds into burning rocks." But breaking through was costing them dearly. The human defense plan used an old military principle called defense in depth. Every million kilometers the Zelthari moved forward brought them into range of new weapon systems, new platforms, and new dangers. The outer system defenses had been designed to slowly bleed the enemy, to force them to use up their missiles and energy. Now, as the armada got close to Saturn, the second layer of defenses turned on. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the Saturn defense grid from her control center on Titan. Around the giant ringed planet, dozens of military bases had been carved into ice moons and hidden within the ring system itself. Each one housed missile batteries, railgun platforms, and something new: directed energy weapons powerful enough to crack capital ships in half. "Enemy formation entering optimal range," her sensor officer reported. Brooks studied the tactical display carefully. The aliens had learned from the earlier fight. They were spreading their ships out and keeping defensive formations. They were trying to reduce casualties. That was good. It meant they were worried. "All stations, you are free to fire. Focus on their biggest ships. Let us show them what humanity builds when we are properly motivated." The Saturn grid released hell. Particle beams, accelerated to almost light speed, crossed the void in microseconds. The energy weapons hit with such incredible force that alien shields overloaded instantly. Their generators exploded from the feedback. Hulls melted. Air vented into space. Ships that had survived 1,000 battles died without firing a single shot in return. The Zelthari armada reeled under the assault. Vexthal watched in horror as 26 warships vanished from his display in less than 1 minute. His hands shook as he gripped his command throne. "All ships, maximum speed. We must close the distance. Deploy decoy drones. Turn on jamming systems." The aliens surged forward, their massive engines burning at full power. They fired everything they had, filling the space around Saturn with missiles and energy beams. Several human installations were destroyed. Their crews died as superheated plasma consumed their stations. But for every human platform that went silent, the grid destroyed 3 more alien vessels, and still, the humans had more surprises waiting. Lieutenant Jake Morrison had volunteered for another dangerous mission. He sat in the cockpit of a Raptor-class interceptor, one of 40 small craft launching from hidden bays on Iapetus. The tiny ships carried prototype antimatter torpedoes, each one powerful enough to destroy a ship 10,000 times their size. "Ghost Squadron, this is Ghost Leader," Morrison spoke into his radio. "Stay together and stay fast. We only get one pass at this. Make it count." "Copy that, Ghost Leader," Amy Rogers replied from Ghost 3. She had insisted on joining this mission too, despite Captain Blake telling her no. "Let us send these attackers home in pieces." The Raptors flew toward the alien formation. Their stealth systems masked their approach. They were so small compared to the huge warships that the Zelthari sensors dismissed them as debris or false readings. By the time the aliens realized what was happening, the Raptors were already in the middle of their formation. Morrison picked his target, a heavy cruiser near the formation center. His hands moved across the controls with practiced precision, bringing his ship into position even as defensive fire started tracking his movement. Weapons armed. Target locked. "Firing torpedo." The antimatter torpedo leaped from its launch rail. 2 seconds later, it struck the cruiser's engineering section. The containment field around the antimatter charge collapsed. Matter met antimatter in the most violent reaction known to science. The cruiser did not just explode. It ceased to exist, replaced by an expanding sphere of pure energy that swallowed 2 nearby frigates. Across the formation, similar explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. The Raptor pilots knew they likely would not survive the mission. They pressed their attacks with determination bordering on suicide. Some made it back to Iapetus. Most did not. But when the squadron's survivors finally pulled away, 28 more alien ships were drifting hulks or expanding clouds of debris. Commander Vexthal stared at the tactical display with numb disbelief. His armada, which had been the pride of the Empire, had been reduced to just over 200 ships. Even worse, they had barely crossed half the distance to Earth. At this rate of losses, there might be no ships left by the time they reached the human homeworld. Navigation. Calculate time to target at maximum sustainable velocity, he ordered. The response came seconds later. 7 days, Commander. But our energy reserves are at 43%. If we continue at this pace, we will reach the enemy homeworld with insufficient power to conduct bombardment operations. Vexthal's claws scraped against his throne. The Empire had very strict rules about retreat. Commanders who withdrew without permission faced execution. But commanders who lost entire fleets faced worse than death. They faced dishonor for their entire bloodline and family. We press on, he decided. Send a message to Imperial Command. Inform them that the humans possess significantly more advanced military capability than anticipated. Request reinforcements. He paused, his alien features twisting in what might have been fear or rage, and tell them that if we fail here, they should send a much larger fleet. Or none at all. The remnants of the Zelthari Armada continued forward. They had no choice now. Retreat meant disgrace and execution. Advance meant probable death, but at least the possibility of victory. They crossed deeper into the solar system, heading toward the asteroid belt. Captain Greg Palmer stood on what remained of the Defender's bridge. His ship had taken severe damage in multiple engagements. Half his crew was dead or wounded, but they were still fighting. Sir, the alien fleet is entering the asteroid belt, Lieutenant Kevin Hart reported. They are maintaining formation, but their shields are weakened. Palmer studied the tactical map. The asteroid belt was where humanity had placed some of its nastiest surprises. Mines that looked like ordinary rocks. Weapon platforms disguised as ore processing facilities. Small attack craft hidden in hollowed-out asteroids. Signal all belt stations, Palmer ordered. Execute Phase 3. Throughout the asteroid belt, humanity's hidden weapons came alive. What the aliens thought was empty space suddenly filled with danger. Mines detonated as the fleet passed. Railgun platforms that had been dormant for years suddenly powered up and fired. Small missiles launched from concealed tubes. The Zelthari formation took more casualties. Their sensors were overloaded, trying to track thousands of small threats. Their point defense systems fired constantly, but could not stop everything. More ships took damage. Some were destroyed outright. Others were crippled and left drifting. By the time the Armada cleared the asteroid belt, only 190 ships remained. Admiral Carl Hughes watched the battle unfold from his command center deep under the Colorado mountains. The tactical display showed the steady reduction of the alien fleet. Each blue icon that disappeared represented human lives lost, but each red icon that vanished was an alien warship that would never threaten Earth. They are still coming, Commander Lisa Grant said quietly. Even after all this, they are still pushing forward. Hughes nodded. They are brave, I will give them that. Or perhaps just too proud to turn back. Either way, they are heading into our strongest defenses now. Mars will be the killing ground. On Mars, preparations were complete. The Red Planet had been transformed over 50 years from a collection of small colonies into a massive military fortress. In orbit, battle stations bristled with weapons. On the surface, installations buried under kilometers of rock controlled missile silos and railgun batteries. The two small moons, Phobos and Deimos, had been hollowed out and converted into weapon platforms, and hidden around Mars, waiting in stealth mode, were the true capital ships of the human fleet. Captain Helen Brooks received orders from Earth Command. Her forces at Saturn had done their job, bleeding the enemy and reducing their numbers. Now it was Mars's turn to finish what they had started. All remaining Saturn forces begin fallback to Mars, Brooks ordered. We regroup and prepare for the final battle. As the battered Zelthari Armada limped toward Mars, Commander Vexthal knew the end was approaching. Whether that end would be victory or total annihilation remained to be seen. But one thing was certain. The humans had surprised them at every turn. These were not the primitives there, intelligence reports had described. These were warriors who had prepared for war and were willing to die, defending their home. The stage was set for the final confrontation. The Zelthari Armada reached Mars orbit with 173 ships remaining. That was less than 60% of their original strength. They had fought through 3 more defensive lines, each one more brutal than the last. The humans had filled the asteroid belt with nuclear mines. They had deployed laser platforms that fired together, focusing enough energy to overwhelm even the strongest shields. They had sent wave after wave of missiles, forcing the aliens to use up precious countermeasures. Now, as the red planet filled their view screens, Commander Vexthal allowed himself a small moment of hope. Mars was defended. His sensors showed that clearly. But surely the humans could not have more tricks. Surely they had used up all their surprises. Once they cleared Mars, Earth itself was only days away. He had never been more wrong in his life. Admiral Carl Hughes stood in the Earth Defense Command Center, watching feeds from Mars with grim satisfaction. The aliens had taken the bait perfectly. They had focused on reaching the inner system, thinking that Earth would be the fortress, the final defense. They expected Mars to be just another obstacle. Mars was the trap. All Mars stations begin Phase 4, Hughes ordered calmly. Captain Greg Palmer received the order with relief. His ship, the Defender, was scarred and damaged from multiple battles. They had been falling back toward Mars for days, deliberately staying just ahead of the alien pursuit. Now, as the red planet's orbital defense grid powered up, Palmer allowed himself a tight smile. "Helm, turn us around. Weapons, target the lead ships. It is time we stopped running and started fighting back." The Mars Defense Network was humanity's true masterpiece. 50 years of construction, trillions in resources, and the labor of millions had created something never seen before. An entire planet transformed into a military fortress. In orbit, dozens of battle stations bristled with weapons. On the surface, installations buried beneath kilometers of rock controlled missile silos, railgun batteries, and energy weapons. The 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos, had been hollowed out and converted into massive weapon platforms. And throughout the system, hidden in orbit around Mars itself, waited the human fleet's true capital ships. The USS Washington emerged from stealth first. Its massive bulk made even the alien dreadnoughts look small. The ship was a monster, built over 20 years in orbital shipyards that had pushed Earth's entire industrial capacity to its limits. It mounted weapons that made the earlier defense platforms look like toys. Mass drivers that could launch projectiles at nearly light speed. Fusion beam projectors. Missile pods carrying hundreds of warheads each. It was not alone. 11 more capital ships appeared around Mars, forming a wall of steel and firepower between the aliens and Earth. Admiral Patricia Cole commanded the Washington from its huge bridge. She had spent 30 years in the service, working her way up from the lowest rank to fleet admiral. Every decision she had made, every sacrifice she had accepted, had been in preparation for this moment. "All ships, this is Cole. Open fire." The Mars Defense Network and the human capital fleet struck at the same time. The amount of firepower was beyond anything the Zelthari had yet encountered. Space itself seemed to tear apart as hundreds of weapons fired at once. Energy beams crossed the void in fractions of a second. Railgun slugs, accelerated to impossible speeds, punched through shields as if they were not there. Missiles came by the thousands, each one guided by computer systems smart enough to predict and counter any evasive moves. The alien formation fell apart under the assault. "Commander." Vexthal felt his ship shake as human weapons found their target. Damage reports flooded in from across the fleet. Ships were dying too fast for his tactical officer to update the display. The dreadnought beside Final Verdict took a direct hit from a railgun and simply came apart, its spine broken by the impact. All ships scatter formation. "Target the largest human vessels. We must break through." But breaking through meant closing the distance, and closing distance meant entering kill zones where human weapons overlapped their fields of fire. The Zelthari tried anyway, because retreat was no longer possible. They had come too far and lost too much. Now it was victory or total destruction. Captain Helen Brooks watched from Titan as the battle around Mars grew more intense. Her own forces had been reduced in the earlier fight, but she had kept one group in reserve. A squadron of heavy bombardment ships carrying experimental weapons. Now seemed like the perfect time to use them. "Launch the Hammer Squadron," she ordered. 6 ships, each one built around a single massive weapon system, began their burn toward Mars. Their cargo was humanity's most desperate creation: gravitational implosion warheads. The theory was simple, but the execution was incredibly complex. Generate a localized gravitational field intense enough to compress matter beyond its limits. In practice, it meant creating tiny black holes that existed for microseconds before disappearing. But those microseconds were enough to crush anything caught nearby. The Hammer Squadron reached firing position and released their weapons. 6 missiles moved slower than conventional warheads but were protected by fields that made them nearly impossible to intercept. They reached the alien formation and detonated. Reality itself seemed to twist and bend. The gravitational implosion warheads created zones where the laws of physics behaved in impossible ways. Alien ships caught in the effect radius crumpled like tin cans under a hammer. Shields meant nothing against gravity. Armor provided no protection. 15 Zelthari vessels were simply compressed into spheres of ultra-dense matter that would take years to decay back to normal. The battle raged for 6 hours. The Zelthari fought with the desperation of warriors who knew they were doomed. They scored victories too, destroying 3 human capital ships and dozens of smaller vessels. The Washington itself took critical damage when an alien ship deliberately rammed into it, punching through the forward shields. Admiral Cole had to evacuate to the backup bridge as fire consumed the main command center. But in the end, numbers and preparation won. Lieutenant Jake Morrison floated in the ruins of his squadron's hangar bay on Iapetus. His magnetic boots were the only thing keeping him from drifting away. Around him, recovery crews searched through wreckage looking for survivors and salvageable equipment. The cost of victory was measured in lives and ships, in sacrifice that went beyond any price tag. "We stopped them," Amy Rogers said quietly, floating beside him. Her Raptor had made it back, though it was barely functional. "We actually stopped them." Morrison nodded, watching Mars through the shattered hangar doors. The red planet was still there, still spinning peacefully. Earth, just visible beyond it, remained untouched. Humanity had survived its first real test against an alien power. Yes, he agreed, but they were not expecting us to fight back. Next time, whoever comes will know what we can do. They will be prepared. Rogers was quiet for a moment. Then we better prepare even more. Captain Greg Palmer stood on what was left of the Defender's bridge. Half the ship was gone. Most of his crew was dead. The vessel would probably never fly again. But they had held the line. They had fought and survived. "Sir," Lieutenant Kevin Hart approached. His uniform was torn and covered in blood, but he was alive. "We are receiving a transmission. It is from one of the alien ships." "A survivor." Palmer felt a chill. "Put it through." The view screen flickered and showed a wounded Zelthari officer. Commander Vexthal, his armor cracked and his breathing labored, stared at Palmer with something like respect in his multiple eyes. "Human commander," Vexthal spoke. The words were translated by salvaged alien computers. "I am defeated. My fleet is destroyed. Before I die, I must know, how did you develop such capability? Our intelligence said you were primitives, barely able to reach your own moon." Palmer thought carefully about his answer. The truth was simple enough. Humanity had found evidence of alien civilizations decades ago. They had spent 50 years preparing for exactly this situation. They had built in secret, turning their solar system into a fortress. They had assumed contact would be hostile, and they had been right. But he chose different words, words that spoke to something deeper. "We looked at the stars and knew we were not alone," Palmer said. "We understood that the universe was dangerous. That survival meant preparation. So we prepared, we built, we trained, and when you came for our home, we were ready. Tell your empire, if any of your kind survive to carry the message, Earth is defended. Humanity will not yield, and if you come again, bring more ships. You are going to need them." Vexthal's alien features moved in what might have been laughter or acknowledgement. "I will transmit your words before the end. Know this, human. The Empire does not forget defeats. You have won a battle, but war may yet come, and next time, they will send not hundreds of ships, but thousands." The transmission ended as life support failed on the alien vessel. Palmer stared at the blank screen for a long moment, then turned to his surviving crew members. "Get me a secure line to Admiral Hughes, and start preparing damage reports. We have a lot of rebuilding to do." When the last Zelthari warship fell silent, its crew dead and its systems failing, only debris remained of what had once been a mighty armada. 300 ships had entered the solar system with confidence and pride. None would leave. The Zelthari armada moved past Uranus with complete confidence. Commander Vexthal looked at the tactical reports and felt pleased. The humans had made no attempt to run away or surrender. Not that it would matter anyway. The few primitive radio signals his crew had intercepted showed panic and confusion, exactly what he expected from a species about to be conquered. "How long until we reach the main target?" Vexthal asked. "At our current speed, 17 of their days," the navigation officer answered. "Keep on course. Send out the reconnaissance drones. I want to know what military strength these creatures have before we start the bombardment." But as the armada moved past Uranus, something strange began to happen. The first sign was small. A flicker in their sensor readings like static on a screen. Then the drones started disappearing. They were not destroyed or damaged. They simply vanished from the tracking system as if they had never existed at all. "Give me a status report," Vexthal demanded. "Unknown, Commander. 11 drones have stopped reporting. All of them were in the same area ahead of us." Before Vexthal could respond, space itself seemed to shimmer and change. Like a curtain being pulled back, thousands of objects appeared around them. They hung in the emptiness of space like patient predators, sleek angular shapes covered with weapons and sensor equipment. "Defensive positions," Vexthal shouted, but he was already too late. The human defense platforms opened fire. Lieutenant Jake Morrison watched the battle from Lunar Station 7's Combat Information Center. The screen showed feeds from dozens of remote platforms. Each one was a masterpiece of human engineering that had been secretly placed throughout the outer solar system over the past 20 years. "Railgun platforms Alpha through Delta are firing," Amy Rogers reported. "Impact in 3, 2, 1. The railguns were mounted on platforms hidden everywhere in the outer solar system. They launched projectiles at nearly the speed of light. Tungsten rods, each one weighing several tons, were pushed through magnetic coils until they became weapons of terrible power. The first wave hit the front of the Zelthari fleet like hammers from heaven. Shields flared bright and then died under the assault. Hull plating that was designed to stop energy weapons crumpled like paper. 7 warships broke apart in the first 3 seconds. Their antimatter cores exploded in brilliant flashes that briefly outshone nearby stars. "Good hits," Captain Blake said, his voice carrying dark satisfaction. "Deploy the Hornet swarms." From hidden launch bays throughout the asteroid belt, thousands of small drones burst out. Each one was no bigger than an old airplane, but packed with smart computer systems and powerful explosives. They flew toward the alien formation like angry insects defending their nest. Commander Vexthal struggled to understand what was happening. His ships were dying. Real Imperial warships that had broken entire planetary fleets were being destroyed by primitives. These humans should not even have space travel, let alone weapons this powerful. "Return fire. All weapons. Launch countermeasures." The Zelthari fleet responded with the discipline of a military that had perfected war over many centuries. Energy beams cut through space. Each one could vaporize a small moon. Missile pods opened and released clouds of seeking weapons. Point defense systems turned on, creating webs of protective fire. But the humans were not fighting fair. Decades of science fiction stories, centuries of warfare, and 50 years of preparation had taught humanity one important lesson. In space, speed equals power and surprise equals victory. The defense platforms did not stay still. They moved constantly on chemical thrusters, making themselves hard to hit. Their computer systems calculated firing solutions with perfect precision. The Hornet drones reached the alien formation and began their deadly work. They did not attack head-on. Instead, they moved in coordinated groups. Dozens of drones would target a single ship looking for weak points. When they found them, perhaps a cooling vent or a sensor array, they struck with perfect accuracy. Small explosions disabled shield generators. Armor was breached. Critical systems were damaged, and then the human warships arrived. Admiral Hughes watched as the Mars Defense Fleet moved toward the battle zone. 23 vessels had been built in orbital shipyards around Mars over the past 15 years. They were not as large as the alien warships, but they were fast and equipped with every weapon system humanity could design. Leading them was the USS Defender, commanded by Captain Greg Palmer. Palmer stood on his bridge watching the tactical display with focused intensity. His crew worked around him with practiced skill. They were veterans of war games and combat training who had prepared for this moment 1,000 times. "What is our weapon status?" Palmer asked. "All missile tubes are loaded. Laser arrays are charged. Railguns are ready," his weapons officer answered. Lieutenant Kevin Hart had never seen real combat, but his hands were steady on the controls. Target the damaged ships first. Hit them hard and fast. Do not give them time to repair. Helm, use attack pattern Sierra 7. The defender rolled into position. Its momentum carried it on a path that would bring it cutting through the alien formation. As it moved, it fired everything. Missiles streaked away, their fusion drives pushing them to incredible speeds. Laser beams, invisible in the vacuum, found their targets with patient accuracy. The ship's main railgun thundered. Each shot released enough energy to power a small city. The Zelthari tried to adapt and change their tactics. Their commanders were skilled warriors. They began using counter-tactics. They focused their fire on the human platforms, destroying them one by one. They sent out their own drone fighters. They tried to form defensive groups, but they were hurt by their own assumptions. They assumed the humans would value their lives and pull back when people died. They assumed the enemy would eventually group together for protection. They assumed that weaker technology meant weaker ability to fight. They were wrong about everything. Lieutenant Morrison had volunteered for what his commanders called a high-risk mission. He now sat in the cockpit of a Raptor-class interceptor. It was one of 40 small ships launching from hidden bays on one of Saturn's moons. The ships were barely bigger than ancient fighter jets, but they carried something special. Prototype antimatter torpedoes. Each one was powerful enough to destroy a ship 10,000 times its size. Ghost Squadron, this is Ghost Leader. Morrison spoke into his communication system. Stay tight and stay fast. We get one pass at this. Make it count. Copy that, Ghost Leader. Amy Rogers replied from Ghost 3. She had insisted on joining the mission even though Blake had tried to stop her. Let us send these invaders home. The Raptors flew toward the alien formation. Their stealth systems hid them from sensors. They were tiny compared to the massive warships, so small that the Zelthari sensors thought they were just debris or sensor errors. By the time the aliens realized their mistake, the Raptors were already among them. Morrison selected his target, a heavy cruiser near the center of the formation. His hands moved across the controls with practiced skill, bringing his ship into position even as defensive fire began tracking him. Weapons armed, target locked, firing. The antimatter torpedo jumped from its launch rail. 2 seconds later, it hit the cruiser's engine section. The field holding the antimatter collapsed and matter met antimatter in the most violent reaction in physics. The cruiser did not explode. It simply stopped existing, replaced by an expanding ball of pure energy that destroyed 2 nearby ships. All across the formation, similar explosions bloomed like deadly flowers. The Raptor pilots knew they probably would not survive, but they pressed their attacks anyway. Some made it back to base. Most did not. When the survivors finally pulled away, 28 more alien ships were floating dead or breaking apart into debris. Commander Vexthal stared at his tactical display in shock. His armada, the pride of the Empire, had been cut down to just over 200 ships. Worse, they had barely crossed half the distance to Earth. At this rate of losses, they might not have any ships left by the time they reached the human homeworld. How long to target at maximum speed? He ordered. The answer came quickly. 7 days, Commander. But our energy reserves are at 43%. If we continue at this pace, we will reach the enemy homeworld without enough power to conduct bombardment operations. Vexthal's claws scraped against his command chair. The Empire had strict rules about retreat. Commanders who pulled back without permission faced execution. But commanders who lost entire fleets faced something worse than death. They faced dishonor for their entire family line. We keep going forward, he decided. Send a message to Imperial Command. Tell them the humans have much more advanced military capability than we thought. Request reinforcements, he paused. And tell them that if we fail here, they should send a much larger fleet. Or no fleet at all. The Zelthari Empire had destroyed 47 different worlds in the last 300 years. Their ships were huge and powerful. Dark metal covered every surface and bright energy cores pulsed with deadly power. When they found Earth on their long-range scanners, a small blue planet full of simple life forms, the Imperial Council took only minutes to approve the invasion. Commander Vexthal stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He had 4 eyes that gleamed with excitement as he looked at the fleet behind him. 300 warships stretched out in perfect formation. Each ship could destroy an entire continent. The humans, according to their information, had barely learned how to use rocket fuel. This would be an easy victory. They would own this star system before the year ended. Set our path to the third planet, Vexthal ordered his crew. Use standard invasion rules. We will take control of the orbit and make them surrender. Far away on Earth, Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat in the observation room of Lunar Station 7. He drank his coffee slowly and looked at Mars through the thick windows. The red planet hung in space like a beautiful red jewel. Small domes covered parts of its surface where humans had built colonies. "Contact," someone called out. The communications officer was Lieutenant Amy Rogers. Her voice stayed calm, even though the message on her screen was alarming. Multiple signals detected. Unknown origin. Distance is outer solar system. Count as 300 vessels. They are large. Captain Henry Blake was the station commander. He had fought in the asteroid wars years ago and seen many battles in the dangerous belt territories. But this was something completely different. This was something new and unknown. "Sound the alarm," Blake ordered quickly. "Get me connected to Earth Command. Wake up everyone on Mars. Tell them visitors might be coming." The Zelthari Armada entered the solar system like a massive avalanche. They did not hide their approach or use any stealth technology. They had no reason to be sneaky. In all their past invasions, primitive species rarely saw them coming until weapons fire lit up their skies. By that time, it was always too late to fight back. But humans had been watching the stars for many generations. Every small piece of space debris, every asteroid, every comet had been recorded and tracked carefully. When 300 massive objects appeared where nothing should exist, alarms went off at every military base from the moon to the edge of the solar system. Admiral Carl Hughes sat in the command center buried deep under the mountains of Colorado. He watched the tactical display with narrow, focused eyes. Around him, dozens of officers worked at their stations. Their fingers moved quickly across holographic screens. The room hummed with controlled energy and purpose. "What do we know?" Hughes asked. Commander Lisa Grant stepped forward with her tablet showing streams of data. "Whatever these things are, they are not natural. We detect propulsion signatures that match matter and antimatter reactions. Energy readings are extremely high. Sir, these are not just ships. They are flying weapons. Where did they come from?" "Unknown. They do not match any theoretical designs in our databases." Hughes nodded slowly. Humanity had spent the last 50 years getting ready for this exact moment. It started when they discovered the abandoned alien outpost on Titan. That ancient ruin taught them one important lesson. They were not alone in the universe, and not all neighbors would be friendly. "Activate Protocol Sentinel," Hughes ordered. "All resources. Full deployment." Across the entire solar system, humanity's hidden defenses came to life. Deep in the asteroid belt, platforms that looked like ordinary rocks began to power up. On the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, installations buried under ice activated their weapon systems. Near Neptune and Uranus, defense satellites that had been dormant for years suddenly went active. Everything humanity had built in secret over 5 decades was now ready. Lieutenant Morrison finished his coffee and set the cup down. He looked at Amy Rogers, who was still working at her communication station. Her face showed concentration but not fear. "How long do we have?" Morrison asked Captain Blake. Blake studied the numbers on his screen. "If they maintain their current speed, maybe 2 weeks before they reach Mars, 3 weeks before Earth. That's not much time." "It's enough," Blake said firmly. "We knew this day might come. We prepared for it. Now we see if all that preparation was worth it." On Earth, billions of people went about their daily lives, unaware that an alien fleet was approaching. The governments had not announced the threat yet. They did not want to cause panic. But in military bases and space stations across the solar system, thousands of men and women put on their uniforms and reported to their battle stations. Commander Vexthal reviewed the scans of the inner solar system. The third planet, Earth, had a single large moon. The fourth planet, Mars, had 2 small moons. He saw the signs of human colonies on Mars and the moon. Primitive structures, nothing that would survive orbital bombardment. "Deploy forward scouts," Vexthal ordered. "I want detailed scans of their military capabilities. Find their weapons, their ships, their defenses." His tactical officer worked quickly. "Scouts deployed, Commander." "They will reach scanning range in 6 rotation periods." Vexthal settled back in his command chair. 300 ships. The largest invasion force the Empire had sent in a generation. It seemed like overkill for such a primitive species, but the Council wanted to send a message. When the Zelthari Empire came to claim a world, nothing could stop them. At least that is what Vexthal believed. Captain Helen Brooks commanded the defense installations on Titan, Saturn's largest moon. She watched her screens as the alien fleet passed Neptune. They were moving fast but not using maximum speed. They seemed confident, almost casual. "They think this will be easy," her second officer said quietly. Brooks smiled without humor. "Let them think that. The longer they underestimate us, the better our chances." She pulled up the strategic map of the solar system. Red dots marked the alien ships. Blue dots marked human positions. There were far more blue dots than anyone outside the military knew about. Hidden platforms, concealed weapons, secret ships waiting in the dark. "Send a message to all outer system stations," Brooks ordered. "Hold fire until they reach the designated zone. Let them come deeper into the system. The trap only works if they are far from escape." Across the solar system, human forces received the same order. Wait. Watch. Let the enemy come closer. And when the time was right, show them that humanity was not helpless prey. The Zelthari armada continued forward, crossing the orbit of Uranus. They passed the orbit of Neptune. They moved deeper into the solar system, heading straight for Mars and Earth beyond it. Commander Vexthal felt satisfied. Everything was going according to plan. He had no idea that he was flying into the most sophisticated trap humanity had ever built. He had no idea that every kilometer his fleet traveled brought them closer to destruction. He had no idea that the primitive species he planned to conquer had spent 50 years preparing for this exact moment. The alien fleet came to invade Earth, but they would never reach it. The annihilation would begin long before they saw the blue planet with their own eyes. The battle for Earth was about to start, and humanity was ready to fight. Admiral Carl Hughes stood in the command center surrounded by his staff, reading the preliminary casualty reports. The numbers were hard to process. 23,000 military personnel dead, 41 capital ships and major installations destroyed, countless smaller vessels lost. The economic cost would take decades to recover from, but Earth still turned. The sun still rose. Humanity survived, and the solar system remained theirs. "Send a message to all commands," Hughes ordered quietly. "Well done. Rest, recover, rebuild. But stay alert. The enemy knows where we are now. They know what we can do. When they return, and they will return, we need to be ready." Admiral Patricia Cole joined him at the command station. Her arm was in a sling and her uniform was scorched and torn. She had barely escaped when the Washington's main bridge was destroyed. "Do you think they will come back?" Hughes nodded slowly. "Without question. But next time, they will face a humanity that has been tested in fire. They set out to invade Earth and were annihilated before reaching Mars. That is a lesson that will echo across the galaxy. We are not prey. We are warriors. And this is our home. On Earth, billions of people looked up at the night sky with new understanding. The stars were no longer just distant points of light or abstract scientific curiosities. They were a frontier, dangerous and vast, filled with both threats and opportunities. Humanity had survived its trial by fire. They had proven themselves capable of defending their home against an advanced alien civilization. But the universe was immeasurably large, and Earth was just one small planet. The Zelthari Empire, wounded but not destroyed, would share the tale of the humans who had wiped out an entire armada. Other alien powers would listen to this story. Some might see it as an opportunity to test themselves. Others might see humanity as a threat that needed to be eliminated. And humanity, bloodied but unbroken, would watch the darkness between stars with patient, determined eyes. Lieutenant Jake Morrison sat in the medical bay on Lunar Station 7, having his injuries treated. Burns on his arms, broken ribs, and a concussion from when his Raptor had been hit by debris during the final battle. But he was alive, which was more than many of his squadron mates could say. Amy Rogers sat in the bed next to him, her leg in a cast. She had crashed hard on landing, but the medical team said she would make a full recovery. "What do we do now?" she asked quietly. Morrison thought about the question. "We rebuild. We improve our defenses. We train new pilots. We build more ships and better weapons. And we prepare for the next fight." "You really think there will be a next fight?" "I know there will be," Morrison said. "The galaxy does not care about fair. It does not care if we want peace. Out there somewhere, other species are watching. Some might be friendly. But we have to assume that some will be hostile. We cannot ever be caught unprepared again. Captain Henry Blake walked through the damaged corridors of Lunar Station 7, making notes on a tablet. The station had taken hits during the battle when alien missiles had gotten through the defensive screen. 17 crew members were dead. Sections of the station were exposed to vacuum. It would take months to repair everything, but they had won. That was what mattered. Blake stopped at an observation window and looked out at Earth. The blue planet hung in space, beautiful and peaceful. Billions of people down there had no idea how close they had come to extinction. The governments had released limited information about the battle, calling it a successful defense against hostile aliens. But the full details remained classified. Maybe that was for the best. Let people sleep peacefully while the military watched the stars. Captain Greg Palmer stood on the salvage dock, watching crews cut apart what remained of the Defender. The ship had served well, but it was beyond repair. Too much damage, too many critical systems destroyed. They would recycle the metal and use it to build new vessels. "It is hard to let her go," Lieutenant Kevin Hart said, standing beside him. Palmer nodded. "Every ship has a soul, they say. The Defender's soul was brave and strong. She carried us through hell and brought us home. We will remember her." Around Mars, the massive cleanup operation continued. Thousands of pieces of debris from destroyed ships, both human and alien, floated in orbit. Each piece was a navigation hazard that needed to be tracked and eventually collected. The alien wrecks were particularly valuable. They contained technology that human scientists were eager to study. Captain Helen Brooks oversaw the recovery operations from her command center on Titan. Her teams were working around the clock, cataloging alien technology, recovering human remains, and securing anything that might be dangerous. "We found something interesting in one of the alien data cores," her technical officer reported. "Star charts." "It shows their territory, and it shows other species' territories too." Brooks studied the holographic display. The Zelthari Empire controlled hundreds of star systems, but they were just one power among many. The galaxy was more crowded than anyone had imagined. "Copy all of this to Earth Command," Brooks ordered. "They need to see this. We need to know what else is out there." On Earth, world leaders met in emergency sessions. The battle had changed everything. Humanity could no longer pretend they were alone. They could no longer focus solely on earthly concerns. The threats from space were real, and preparation was no longer optional. Funding for space defense was increased dramatically. New shipyards were approved for construction. Military recruitment saw a massive surge as young people volunteered to defend humanity. The Mars colonies would be expanded and fortified even more. Plans were made to establish bases on the moons of Jupiter and Saturn. Humanity was preparing for the long war. Admiral Hughes met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff in a secure conference room. On the screens around them were projections and battle analysis. Every engagement had been studied in detail, looking for lessons that could be learned. "We won because we were prepared," Hughes said. "We won because we spent 50 years building defenses in secret. We won because we had the element of surprise. But those advantages are gone now. The next enemy that comes will know what we are capable of. They will plan accordingly." "What do you recommend?" the chairman asked. "We push out our defensive perimeter," Hughes said. "Right now our defenses are concentrated in the inner solar system. We need bases in the outer system. We need early warning stations beyond Pluto. We need ships that can patrol and intercept threats before they get close to Earth." "That will cost trillions," someone objected. "And how much is Earth worth?" Hughes replied sharply. "How much are 8 billion human lives worth? We saw what happened to the 47 species the Zelthari conquered. They do not take prisoners. They do not offer mercy. They exterminate. If we want to survive in this galaxy, we have to be strong enough that attacking us is suicide." The room was silent for a moment. Then one by one the leaders nodded. Lieutenant Morrison was released from the medical bay a week after the battle. He reported to the pilot briefing room where survivors of Ghost Squadron had gathered. Out of 40 pilots who had flown that mission, only 12 had returned. The empty seats in the room were a silent reminder of the price they had paid. "New assignments are being handed out," the squadron commander said. "Some of you will be training the next generation of pilots. Others will be testing new ship designs. All of you have proven yourselves in combat. Humanity needs warriors like you in the years ahead." Morrison accepted his new orders. He would be training pilots at the Mars Defense Academy, teaching young men and women how to fly, how to fight, how to survive. It was not as glamorous as combat, but it was just as important, maybe more important. Amy Rogers received similar orders. She would be working with engineers, helping design the next generation of Raptor interceptors based on lessons learned in combat. Her combat experience would be invaluable in creating better ships. Across the solar system, humanity adapted to its new reality. They were no longer alone. They were no longer safe. But they were also no longer helpless. The wreckage around Mars served as a reminder and a warning. 300 alien warships had come to conquer Earth. None had survived. The message was clear: Earth was defended. Humanity would fight, and any species that tested them would pay a terrible price. As the months passed, the debris field around Mars was slowly cleared. Some pieces were kept as memorials. Others were studied and reverse-engineered. The alien technology was decades ahead of human science in some areas, and studying it would accelerate human advancement. But the most important legacy of the battle was not technological. It was psychological. Humanity had faced an existential threat and survived. They had proven they could stand together against impossible odds. They had shown that courage and preparation could overcome seemingly superior force. The stars no longer seemed quite so distant or mysterious. They were a battlefield now, a frontier that needed defending. And humanity, tested and hardened by fire, stood ready. Commander Vexthal's final message had been received by the Zelthari Empire. The recording had been found in an escape pod that was recovered months after the battle. His warning was clear. The humans were not primitives. They were warriors who had spent generations preparing for war. Any future invasion would require overwhelming force. The Empire's response remained unknown.